In the old, creaky house on the outskirts of town, there lived a young couple. They had heard the rumors of the house being haunted, but they didn't believe in such things. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the attic. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. As they climbed the stairs, the noise grew louder and more sinister. Finally, they reached the top, and the door to the attic creaked open. To their horror, they found themselves face to face with a ghostly figure. They screamed and tried to run, but the ghost blocked their way. Just as they thought it was all over, the ghost spoke. "I'm not here to harm you," it said. "I'm here to warn you. Get out of this house now, or you'll suffer the same fate as me." With that, the ghost disappeared, and the couple realized that they were standing on a trapdoor. They opened it, and to their shock, they found a shallow grave with the remains of the previous owners. They immediately fled the house, never to return again. Emily had always been afraid of elevators, but she had to take one every day to get to her office on the 15th floor. One day, as she stepped into the elevator, she noticed that the button for the 13th floor was missing. Emily didn't think too much of it and pressed the button for the 15th floor. But as the elevator began to ascend, it suddenly jolted to a stop. Emily felt her heart race as the lights flickered and the elevator car shuddered. She pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. She tried her phone, but there was no signal. Emily was trapped in the elevator with no way out. As the minutes turned into hours, Emily began to hear strange noises coming from outside the elevator car. She could hear what sounded like footsteps, but there was no one there when she peeked through the crack in the doors. As the hours turned into days, Emily began to lose all hope of being rescued. She started to feel like she was going insane, trapped in the tiny elevator car with no food or water. But then, on the 4th day, the door suddenly opened. Emily stepped out, weak and disoriented, and looked around. She was on the 13th floor, the floor that had been missing from the elevator buttons. As she stumbled down the hallway, Emily realized that something was terribly wrong. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. And that's when Emily saw them. They were shadowy figures, lurking in the corners and watching her with cold, dead eyes. They had been waiting for her, and now they had her. Emily screamed, but it was too late. She had been lured into a trap, and now she was theirs to keep forever. Jacob had always been fascinated by the abandoned house at the end of his street. It was a large, old mansion that had been empty for as long as he could remember. One day, he decided to explore it. As he stepped inside, Jacob was struck by the eerie silence that permeated the house. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floors creaked beneath his feet. But despite its dilapidated state, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that someone had recently been there. He continued exploring the house, room by room, until he came to a locked door. Jacob tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he decided to leave and come back with a key. The next day, Jacob returned with a set of lockpicks. He successfully unlocked the door and stepped inside, but what he found made him wish he had never entered the house. The room was filled with dark magic, and at the center of it all was a book. The pages of the book were made of human skin, and the ink was written in blood. Jacob couldn't believe what he was seeing. As he tried to leave the room, he heard a voice behind him. "You should never have come here, Jacob." Jacob turned around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the doors to the room slammed shut, and Jacob was trapped inside. He could hear the sound of chanting coming from outside the room, and he knew that whoever had trapped him there was performing some sort of dark ritual. Just when he thought it was all over, Jacob saw a figure appear in front of him. It was his own reflection, but it was twisted and evil-looking. The reflection smiled and said, "Welcome to your new home, Jacob. You will be staying here for a very long time." And that's when Jacob realized that he had been lured into the house as part of a dark magic's plan to trap him there forever. Olivia had always been fascinated with the antique mirror in her bedroom. It was a beautiful ornate mirror, with a golden frame and intricate carvings. But there was something about it that always made her feel uneasy. One night, as Olivia was getting ready for bed, she caught a glimpse of a reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't her own face she saw staring back at her. It was the face of a young girl with long black hair and piercing green eyes. Olivia turned around, but no one was there. She tried to shake it off and went to bed, but she couldn't help feeling like she was being watched. The next morning, Olivia woke up to find that her reflection in the mirror was still that of the young girl. She tried to wipe it off, but it wouldn't budge. As the days went on, the reflection seemed to become more and more lifelike. One night, Olivia decided to take a closer look at the mirror. As she leaned in, she saw the reflection of the young girl reach out and grab her by the wrist. Olivia tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. Just when she thought it was all over, the reflection of the young girl spoke. "Olivia, it's me, your sister. I've been trapped in this mirror for years. You're the only one who can help me." Olivia was shocked. She had never known she had a sister. But as she looked closer, she realized that the reflection did bear a striking resemblance to her. She decided to help her sister, and the two of them worked together to find a way to break the curse that had trapped her in the mirror. They finally succeeded, and Olivia's sister was free at last. But as Olivia looked into the mirror one last time, she saw that her own reflection had been replaced by that of her sister. And that's when she realized that the curse had been passed on to her, and she was now trapped in the mirror for all eternity. Samantha had always been afraid of her grandmother's old doll. It was a porcelain doll with a cracked face and an eerie smile. But when her grandmother passed away, Samantha found herself inheriting the doll. She tried to throw it away, but something made her hesitate. One night, Samantha heard a strange noise coming from her closet. When she opened it, the doll was sitting on her bed, its eyes fixed on her. Samantha tried to ignore it and went back to sleep, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone in her room. The next morning, Samantha woke up to find the doll sitting at the foot of her bed, its head turned towards her. She tried to ignore it again, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. That night, Samantha had a dream that she was playing with the doll. But as the dream went on, the doll's smile became more and more twisted. Samantha woke up, heart racing, to find the doll standing at the edge of her bed. She tried to get up, but found that she couldn't move. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her every move, and its smile became wider and more sinister. Suddenly, the doll started to move towards her, its arms outstretched. Just when she thought it was all over, Samantha heard a knock on her door. It was her brother, who had come to check on her. The moment he stepped into the room, the doll stopped moving and went back to its original position. Samantha was relieved and thought it was just her imagination. But when she turned to look at the doll one last time before going back to sleep, she saw that its smile had become even more twisted than before. And that's when she realized that the doll was still alive, and it was only biding its time before it could take control. Emily had always loved going on hikes in the woods near her cabin. But on this particular day, something felt off. As she walked deeper into the woods, she had a distinct feeling that she was being watched. She tried to shake off the feeling and continue on her hike, but then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but no one was there. Emily started to pick up the pace, trying to get back to her cabin as quickly as possible. As she made her way through the dense forest, she realized that she was lost. The trees all looked the same and the winding paths seemed to go in circles. Panic set in as she realized she might not make it out of the woods alive. Just then, she heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. Emily froze, heart racing as she tried to make out the source of the noise. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the bushes, slowly making its way towards her. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes and a twisted smile. Emily tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was trapped, face to face with the terrifying creature. Just when she thought it was all over, the creature spoke in a deep, raspy voice. "Emily, it's me, your neighbor. You must have taken a wrong turn, and ended up in my yard. You're safe now." Relieved and embarrassed, Emily thanked her neighbor and made her way back to her cabin, still shaking from the experience. But as she lay in bed at night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She looked out the window and saw her neighbor's house in the distance. It was then that she realized that the voice of the creature in the woods didn't sound anything like her neighbor's voice. She sat up in bed, realizing with a sinking feeling that she had just encountered something truly terrifying in the woods. And she had no idea what it really was. Jacob was an experienced hiker, but he had never ventured into the deep woods before. He had heard stories of hikers getting lost in the vast forests, never to be seen again, but he didn't believe in the legends. As he set out on his hike, he marveled at the beauty of the forest. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a golden glow over everything. The birds sung sweetly, and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze was like a symphony. But as night fell, the woods became a sinister place. The once peaceful forest turned into a maze of twisted branches and gnarled roots. Jacob stumbled and tripped over the rough terrain, his nerves frayed. Just as he was about to give up hope, he saw a small light in the distance. He ran towards it, hoping it was a sign of civilization. As he drew closer, he saw a figure holding the light. It was an old woman, with long, gray hair and a face twisted with age. She beckoned him closer, and he followed. But as he drew closer, he realized that the woman was not what she seemed. Her face was contorted with malice, and her eyes were filled with an otherworldly glow. She led him deeper into the woods, her grip on his arm tightening with every step. He tried to resist, but he was too weak and disoriented to break free. Hours passed as they walked, with no end in sight. Jacob knew he was in grave danger, but he couldn't escape. He was at the mercy of the old woman and the dark forces that controlled her. As dawn approached, the woman stopped and turned to face Jacob. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever before, and she whispered in a voice that chilled him to the bone. "You mine now," she said. "You'll never leave this forest alive." And with those words, Jacob felt a cold hand grab his heart. He fell to the ground, his lifeless body consumed by the darkness of the forest. Jane had always been afraid of mirrors. She couldn't explain why, but she always felt like there was something sinister lurking behind the glass. One day, she moved into a new apartment and noticed a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. She tried to ignore it, but every time she passed by, she couldn't help but feel like it was watching her. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. Jane would see movement in the reflection, even when no one was in the room with her. She would hear whispers coming from the mirror, as if someone was trying to communicate with her. But the most terrifying thing of all was what happened when she looked directly into the mirror. Instead of seeing her own reflection, she would see a twisted, demonic version of herself, with horns and glowing red eyes. Jane tried to ignore it, but the more she tried to avoid the mirror, the stronger its pull became. She felt like she was being drawn towards it, as if it was calling out to her. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood in front of the mirror, staring directly into its depths, and demanded to know what it wanted from her. And that's when she saw it, the figure standing behind her in the reflection. It was a creature with razor-sharp teeth and glowing eyes, ready to pounce. Jane turned around just in time to see the creature lunge at her, but it was too late. The mirror had already claimed her soul, trapping her in a world of eternal darkness and terror. Jenna and her friends decided to take a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the woods. They had heard stories about strange occurrences in the area, but they didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural beings. They were just looking for a peaceful weekend away from the city. But as soon as they arrived, things started to feel off. The cabin was old and musty, with strange markings etched into the walls. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of leaves rustling outside. As night fell, the group decided to make dinner and settle in for the night. But as they sat around the table, they heard a loud banging on the door. Jenna cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole, but she saw nothing. She opened the door, and once again, there was nothing there. Suddenly, they heard footsteps upstairs, as if someone was walking around. They slowly made their way up the stairs, only to find the bedroom empty. But as they turned to leave, they saw a shadowy figure out of the corner of their eye. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone in the cabin. They frantically searched for a way out, but the windows were boarded up and the door was stuck. As they huddled together in fear, they heard a voice whispering in their ears, telling them that they would never leave the cabin alive. The voice promised to torture them until they begged for death. One by one, the group succumbed to the voice's demands, breaking down in terror and agony. And as the sun rose the next morning, the cabin stood empty, a silent reminder of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. Mark and his friends were going on a road trip, driving across the country to visit all the famous landmarks they had always dreamed of seeing. They had been on the road for days, and were now in the middle of the desert, miles away from civilization. As they drove down a long, winding road, they suddenly saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes and waving frantically at them. Mark slowed down the car and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he asked. The woman looked up at him with eyes that were dark and empty. "Please, help me," she said. "My car broke down and I've been stranded out here for hours." Mark and his friends were hesitant at first, but they eventually decided to help the woman. They offered to give her a ride to the nearest town, and she gratefully accepted. As they drove, the woman told them her story. She had been driving to a job interview when her car broke down, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere. She had no food or water, and was desperate for help. After what seemed like hours, they finally arrived at a small town. Mark and his friends dropped the woman off at a gas station and watched as she walked away, feeling proud of themselves for doing a good deed. But as they continued on their road trip, strange things began to happen. They started to see the woman everywhere they went, sometimes standing by the side of the road or watching them from a distance. And then, one night, they saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road, blocking their way. Mark slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. They hit the woman with a sickening thud. They got out of the car and looked at the woman's lifeless body lying on the road. And that's when they noticed something strange. The woman's eyes were glowing in the darkness, and her skin was pale and cold. It was then that Mark and his friends realized that they had picked up something far more sinister than just a stranded traveler. They had unwittingly picked up a ghost, and now they were cursed to live with the consequences of their mistake.